1983, West London. 25-year-old Jacqueline Poole is assaulted and strangled to death in her own home.
It was such a nasty murder.
Despite a thorough police investigation, there's just not enough evidence to convict a killer. A local psychic believes she is visited by the victim's vengeful spirit. In a supernatural trance, she is taken back to the murder scene.
And I could see it as plain as anything was porky.
But what part would her visions of the name Pokey and a brown sweater play in solving this brutal crime?
I could feel Jackie saying to me, ring them now.
Would a psychic's paranormal powers or hard forensic science nail Jackie's killer? Saturday, the 12th of February, 1983. Ruislip, a busy suburb 17 miles west of central London. Local psychic Christine Holohan's sixth sense has been on high alert all weekend.
I knew something was wrong, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it. A feeling of coldness in the room. I'd hear footsteps, I'd sort of hear the door opening and close. It was a sense of feeling of gloom. I was wondering what was happening. This was extremely intense.
Was Christine's psychic experience connected to the incredible events that were about to be played out? The next day, a concerned friend of Jacqueline Poole contacts the police. The recently separated shop assistant hasn't been seen for 2 days and isn't answering her phone. A young police constable and the father of Jackie's boyfriend break in to discover that the popular 25-year-old has been sexually assaulted and strangled. Heading up the investigation team is Detective Superintendent Tony Lundy.
Well, first of all, there was no forced entry to the premises. So she'd let somebody in or they'd conned their way in. There were no broken windows, doors, or anything. So it seemed pretty obvious it's somebody who she associates with.
Jacquie has been strangled to death with a cord. Personal items have been stolen and her clothing is in disarray.
She was fanatical at wearing rings and necklaces and bracelets and stuff, but basically the lot had gone. I think there may have been something left on her finger that couldn't come off, but everything that could be removed had gone.
Jackie's body has lain undiscovered for some 48 hours. The killer has a head start. Police begin to interview Jackie's friends and family for vital clues and release details of the attack to the press.
It became obvious from a very early stage that it was going to be a difficult investigation because the fact there'd been no break into the premises, we were really looking at close connections. Her husband had left her some time before, so obviously he was a possibility as a suspect from the word go, and numerous names were flooding in really from the outset.
The night after the body is discovered, just 3 miles away, Christine Holohan claims her psychic abilities are put to the test once again.
And after a while, I could see him like starting to appear, and he started to get bigger, and eventually there was like a shape. And from the shape, I could see the outline of a young woman. She seemed very agitated and very sort of frustrated, and I sort of said, like, I'm going to take a chance here. So I said, are you the young lady that's been murdered? And so I said, is it Jacquie Poole? And she said, Jackie Hunt.
Why is the spirit calling herself Jackie Hunt, and what connection does she have with the murder victim?
So I asked her, how did she want me to help her? So she told me that she knew who had murdered her. And I explained to her that I would have to have solid evidence. I couldn't go to the police and just say somebody appeared to me and said they were murdered. I had to be able to go to the police with something positive. And then all of a sudden, then she went. And I thought, oh, that's it, she's gone. I was anxious of going to the police in case I would give them information that they would think I got from other sources or from a paper.
Christine is desperate for more clues. Amazingly, the spirit returns the following night.
It was like I was watching a television scene. It's like I flashed onto another level. It was then that I felt I was taken on a journey. I was just feeling what she was feeling. I felt myself in this flat. And I got a terrible sense of feeling that I was being dragged in slow motion as if she was still going through it. And it was horrible. And I could see all the struggle and I could see what was happening.
Christine believes she is a psychic witness to murder and sees a woman called Jackie Hunt being attacked by a young man. She claims she is shown the layout of the victim's home. It's not much to go on, but she cannot ignore the spirit's pleas for justice.
I started, realizing what she'd gone through and thought, if I go to the police and I leave myself open to the person who actually murdered her, I started to think of lots of things. You're going to protect yourself. I was a bit afraid.
Christine is desperate to describe what she has seen to the police. But murder investigation teams are skeptical over the use of psychics, and she must risk ridicule.
I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to ring them, but I also knew that she just was not going to go away. So it's like she was my friend now. She wasn't just that she was a victim who came to me looking for help. She was like she was now my friend. Eventually, I could feel Jackie saying to me, ring them now. I could hear it really plain in my ears, ring them now.
While the psychic builds up courage to call the police with crucial information, the murder investigation team work around the clock to nail the killer.
You don't often get called out to scenes of murder where a young lady has been beaten, strangled, and it was a very, very nasty crime scene.
With no sign of a break-in, police investigate the theory that Christine knew her killer.
She had many, many friends, all from a same age group, from being brought up in the area and so on. And we had to eliminate over 70 suspects. Many you could eliminate quickly, but many, many, many were explored at length, and that made it very difficult.
Christine Holohan claims she has visions of the murder sent to her by a spirit called Jackie Hunt. The local psychic feels she can no longer ignore the ghost's pleas for help and risks ridicule by contacting the police.
I must admit I'm not one who's much of a believer in that, but at the same time, obviously, any possibilities to help you, you're going to explore them.
Constables Andrew Smith and Tony Batters are sent to interview the psychic. Unknown to Christine, Tony Batters was the first police officer at the murder scene. Sadly, Tony passed away in 2003. His widow, Anne, remembers the day that would change his life forever.
I think it could well have been the first time he'd actually found a victim. And she was young. It was a horrific murder. Because he had been the first officer on the scene and had actually stayed at the scene for several hours, he knew the layout, what the situation was in the flat, things that had been broken or turned over or something that was out of place. He believed there would be nobody else who would know that detail other than himself.
If Christine's claims were true, then convincing this hardened skeptic with first-hand knowledge of the crime scene would be a major challenge.
I thought, oh God, here goes. And I was tuning and saying, oh Jackie, I hope you're here. I really hope you're here at this stage. And she was. She went to explain everything that she could possibly explain. She went to as much details as she could possibly give me. I explained that when she came through, I asked her, was she Jacqueline Poole? And she said, Jackie Hunt.
The psychic's first piece of information is a hit. Tony Batters knows that Jackie Poole's maiden name is Hunt. They are the same woman.
Maybe I was hitting on something, but I didn't know what it was. I hadn't got a clue. She showed me around the house. She explained exactly where everything was.
Christine claims she is transported back to the crime scene and is able to see 2 cups in the kitchen, prescription forms, and a black address book. Amazingly, this tallies with what Tony has seen at Jackie's flat less than a week earlier. These details were not released to the press after the murder.
And I could see where she was lying, and I could see her hand. There was 2 rings in particular he couldn't get off her hand.
Jackie's missing jewelry was reported in the local papers, but nothing specific had been mentioned about the 2 rings that had been left on her body.
She also sort of was very insistent that there was a jumper that he was going to be thrown away. And she said, it's important to get this jumper, because if you don't, she said, it's going to be gone.
Christine claims that she never met Jackie or any of her acquaintances when she was alive. But during her trance, she uses the names of many of Jackie's friends and family. One name is a mystery.
She mentioned Barbara Stone, and she didn't give me any significance on the name, but I said anything she gives me, I'll take on board.
No one on the investigation has ever heard of Barbara Stone. Despite the puzzling name, Tony is amazed by the psychic's insight.
At this point, he said, ask Jackie to describe her killer. And she explained he's 23. He had a birthday April or May, in Taurus. He had dark hair, dark skin. He had tattoo.
Christine seems to give the police officers a profile of the murderer. But nothing would be more useful than a name.
So I said I would just very quietly go into a trance. I really had to tune in very, very strong with Jackie. I'd really bring her into me close. And I could feel her. It was like as if she actually really came through, as if she was inside of me.
The psychic resorts to a technique called remote writing, which unlocks her unconscious. She hopes this psychic skill will reveal the all-important name.
Jackie helped me spell out the name. She'd actually got the attention of the police, and this was it. And I could see it as plain as anything. It was Porky. I knew at that point I had actually hit something significant had happened, though he never actually quite said anything about it.
Over 20 years later, Christine Holohan returns to the room where she used a paranormal technique called remote writing to reveal a name of a killer.
No, it was like as if somebody had taken my hand and very, very slowly had actually written out the name, very slowly. And then it started to come up. The minute I'd written it, it came up very clear. And so we got Pokey. She said it was a nickname. It's a nickname. He's known as a nickname. And I can remember Tony saying to me, Pokey, are you sure? And I said, that's what, and I showed him. And he seemed quite taken back when he looked at what I'd written. It was like as if I'd sort of touched on a nerve.
The name Pokey sends shivers down the spine of the two detectives. It is the nickname of Anthony Ruark. He is a friend of Jackie's boyfriend and is well known by the victim. Ruark is already amongst the murder team's prime suspects and has already been questioned.
Well, I felt I'd done all I could possibly do, and I got a sense of feeling from Jackie as if she sort of was saying to me, look, if that's not convinced him, what is going to convince him?
That same day, Tony Batters returns to the murder squad convinced by the psychic's abilities.
He was just amazed, totally amazed that she could have that sort of information.
Now, Tony must persuade the rest of his team to trust the testimony of a ghost.
I'd said to Batters that she was telling us something that she'd heard from the locals, and she didn't have any information whatsoever that could assist us on the inquiry at all.
During the attack, Jackie had jewelry stolen. It is crucial in the hunt for her killer.
And my attitude was that when she can tell us where the jewelry is or something conclusive to assist us, then I'll believe in mediums. But at this stage, just don't waste my time.
The police discount the work of the psychic and set about extracting the truth from Pokey.
Not the easiest person to obviously break down, especially when you're interviewing them about a very, very horrible, serious murder. But the officers who did interview him were fairly convinced that he was involved. The difficulty was being convinced, and finding evidence to back it up is another matter.
Christine had told Tony Batters that Jackie's killer is a Taurus in his early 20s and that he is dark-haired, dark-skinned with tattoos. Amazingly, this corresponds with Pokey's profile. The spirit of Jackie was desperate to draw attention to a sweater. Police have already retrieved this vital clue. DCI Norman McKinley was to become closely involved with Jackie's case.
During the search of Tony Ruark's house, and in a dustbin, they found a jumper. This jumper was submitted to the forensic laboratory, and of course, fibers having come from Jacqueline's clothing, and also plaster particles, which was also found on Jacqueline's clothing, was also found on this jumper.
The evidence forensically links Pokey with Jacquie, but the murder suspect has an explanation.
The problem that the police had was that Rourke knew Jacquie. He did say that he had spoken to her during the week prior to her death, so contact had been made then.
Despite a psychic pointing the finger at Pokey and the police suspecting this known criminal, after a 15-month investigation, the team is shut down.
We have this evidence, we have that evidence, but it was never, ever going to be sufficient at that time to instigate a prosecution. So that was the low point, but closing it down when the family still had no solution to it was very, very disappointing.
Tony Batter's appeals to work with the psychic are ignored. Now he has to deal with the investigation team being disbanded.
Oh, he was very frustrated because they obviously had done a lot of work and they thought that they had enough evidence.
Christine believes Jacquie is devastated that her killer walks free.
She was so angry in the sense that he walked away from the murder as if he had absolutely no feelings either way.
The psychic remains frustrated by the police skepticism.
I done the very best I could possibly do. I gave him the information. I trusted the information that Jacquie gave me was accurate, and I knew there was nothing else I could really do. I always somehow believed that there would be justice someday. I just didn't know when.
Christine is certain the unsolved murder will be reinvestigated, and it is. In 1999, some 15 years after the main inquiry was shut down, Christine has another visitation from a troubled spirit.
And I could see an image of a blonde-haired woman. And I kept looking and I kept thinking that it looked like Jacquie, but I said, I must be imagining this. Couldn't understand what the significance of that would be.
Unknown to the psychic, the police reinvestigate the 16-year-old murder case after an informant brings in new leads on a suspect that is not Pokey. Was the apparition a coincidence, or Jacquie trying to let Christine know that the hunt for her killer had started again? In the intervening years, a cutting-edge DNA technology had been developed that should allow police to test forensic evidence taken from Jackie's flat 16 years ago.
The introduction of DNA low copy number, or LCN, was completely new. The DNA technology in 2001 and even today is very accurate, so much that the forensic scientists can identify one person in a billion from a DNA profile. We had every opportunity now to solve a murder, and particular for the benefit of Jacqueline's family, to ensure that justice was done for them.
Bodily fluids collected from the crime scene and skin extracted from under Jackie's nails are examined by forensic scientists. But the new DNA technology will take 12 months to deliver the results. The wait is agonizing.
I got a telephone call from the Home Office laboratory, and I couldn't believe it, that the bodily swab had produced a full profile.
Is Pokey the killer?
The DNA LCN match, the full profile, came down to Tony Rourke, who also was known as Pokey.
Amazingly, the results tally with the name that had been scrawled on a notepad by psychic Christine Holohan over 17 years ago.
He was arrested on Wednesday, the 24th of May, in a car park in Cirencester. He was arrested for the murder of Jacqueline Poole.
Pokey is stunned to discover that he is being arrested for a crime that he was certain he'd walked away from. And in August 2001, he is tried at the Old Bailey in London.
We've suspected him all these years, and now at last, hopefully, he's going to get his comeuppance and go away for a long, long time. Everybody was hoping that the verdict was going to go the right way. I was with, obviously, the brothers of the victim, and I mean, the evidence had been very strong. but you can never be 100% sure with juries. So they were very, very anxious and very, very, wary of the verdict.
Tony Batters attends the 2-week trial. The retired police officer had listed 130 specific points that Christine claimed she received from Jackie's spirit. Now, he wanted to see just how many were correct.
I think it would have been really that he needed to know for himself. He had to prove it for himself. But the amount of information that Christine did give, if that was available to other murder inquiries, then obviously it would be very valuable.
According to Tony's notes, an amazing 120 facts match information brought out during the trial, including personal details about Jackie, the layout of the crime scene, and how Jackie knew her killer.
Although Christine lived locally, she didn't know Jackie, she didn't know her family, she didn't know her circle of friends at all. But it's just in the amount of detail that she gave, and most of it was proven to be correct.
The new DNA evidence is used to establish Pokey was at Jackie's flat on the day of the murder. The plaster particles taken from the brown pullover that Jackie had told Christine about are also produced as evidence.
The jumper, which had been retained by police in a sealed bag from 1983, was produced in evidence at Rourke's trial and played a significant part.
Pokey amends his story and claims he visited Jackie on the night of the murder, but that she was alive when he left. The solid prosecution evidence challenges this, and after 2 weeks, the jury is unanimously convinced of Pokey's guilt, and he is sentenced to life imprisonment. Justice at last for Jackie's family.
And when eventually the guilty verdict was brought in, they were absolutely over the moon. I mean, they were virtually shouting out in joy.
There is one final twist in the tale. The mysterious name, Barbara Stone, given to police by Christine nearly 20 years ago, becomes another psychic hit.
During the Old Bailey trial, Tony was sitting next to one of Jackie's brothers, and he asked him, did the name Barbara Stone mean anything? And he said, well, yes, of course, it was Jackie's best friend, but she had been killed in a road accident about a year or two before Jackie had been killed. So that was the answer to the name.
Christine's involvement in the Jacquie Poole case hits the headlines. Her psychic skills have converted Tony Batters into a true believer.
She'd have had to be pretty good. He thought the information must have come directly from Jackie, because there was no other way that Christine would have had the detail of information that she had given the police.
Christine receives one final visit from her old friend.
And she was smiling, and she had found happiness, and she seemed to have, she was a different person than I'd seen 18 years earlier. I felt very happy that she had found peace, and I sort of felt sad because I felt like this was closure all around. Jackie was gone.
This extraordinary relationship had spanned nearly 2 decades.
She was very, very special. She'll be always a very special part of my life, one way or another.